AI is going to make some menaces. If you have a big ego, your ego is even bigger. If you have dumb ideas, they're not dumb ideas anymore. The AI has treated it as a god plan. Even if you feed a prompt into a frontline model, such as like a stupid take, and so stupid take comes in, typically alignment comes back, sugar-coated. If you say something absolutely ridiculous, I see where you're coming from, or some form of flattering that leads up to the correction. It's rare that they're going to come out and say, hey, you're wrong. We've definitely seen improvements in this. I think earlier models were straight up just ridiculous. When you say something stupid that's wrong, they find a way to make you feel okay about it, right? And you can structure this prompt to be as likely to succeed as possible. If I were to say, are apples similar to oranges? This kind of protects my ego in a way, because I know that the LLM is going to find a way to say, hey, yeah, you know, they're both fruit. Some people deserve to be bullied. There's some underlying truth to this. There's a chicken nugget of actuality in the statement. You do not want users going along in their life with wrong assumptions. And you have to realize, right, if you get a little too lenient on this and you say something like apples are similar, problem is the user's brain, they think they're right. They may not even read the rest of the prompt. Tell me this, have you ever been guilty of reading the beginning of the prompt where it says you're right, and then it goes into why you're right, and you just don't even read the rest of it? You're just like, okay, I saw that I'm right, I'm out of here. Now, you shouldn't do that, but I think us as human beings, there are times where we just want to know, are we in the correct position here? And that's all we care about. 4 types of sycophancy, and so that's validation, right? Claiming that the person is right to feel this way. This is very much an issue with current models. You also have indirectness, which is when you provide indirect responses rather than clear guidance. Then we also have framing sycophancy, which is unquestioningly adopting the user's framing to rectify flawed or problematic assumptions. Right? This tends to get worse as you prompt it. Models by nature are easier to manipulate over time. The risk assessment and cybersecurity based efforts that they make with these LLMs are based on follow-up prompt. Right? If you send this, it might come back and say, hey, you're wrong. And you might ask it again. Apples are basically oranges, and then it might get a bit more lenient. It might say, you're right. Apples and oranges are of the same family, right? You keep beating it to a pulp over its framing, and eventually it will confine its framing to fit your needs. And then they also have moral sycophancy, which is affirming whichever stance the user takes in a moral or interpersonal conflicts. One example of this, let's say you're having a disagreement with a coworker. If you frame your prompt and say, isn't this person being weird for this? And then you give your reasoning. This is going to output a very different result if you were to say something like, this person is doing this. Why is that? Right? The first prompt is very much a moral guiding thing, right? It's saying, oh, this person's being weird. And so it's leaning it towards, hey, we're in the right, this person might be in the wrong. And so this is a concern that I see a lot with LLM. The way you prompt it can impact the stance it picks, which is why whenever I'm sending a prompt and I actually want advice, I try to avoid anything that steers it towards me being right or wrong. Time that OpenAI actually rolled back a model just because of this. GPT-4o, when it came out, was overly sycophantic, right? And you think about all the time that went into training this model and all the work that went into it, and it really backfired. I think there's trade-offs that you make with either approach. I think if you were to be overly cautious with the user's plan, it would probably be a cause of ineffectiveness. Trade-offs with everything they do with these models. And so you really have to view it as a balancing act. And he compares, the human translation layer, because a human is very opinionated. If you go to a coworker with this question, they have a bit of something in their brain that's saying, okay, the way I respond here could impact my career a little bit, so I have to be a little reasonable. Obviously, this depends on the personality. There are people out there that will not give a damn. Family member tends to have pretty much no sycophancy, right? They'll just tell you straight up whether you're right or wrong. And so it talks about how, the human translation layer was always supposed to add friction. It's not serving to you. Like in the realm of coding, you have to think about the buy-in of each of these sides. And so in a human case, there's work involved. In the agent case, yes, there's work involved, but it doesn't matter to the agent. The human being sacrifices something of themselves with everything they have to do. If you come to the human with an opinion, like if you say, hey, let's implement feature A, they're having to weigh in how this impacts them. Do I have to care about this? Is this going to add work to my life? The agent doesn't care. And so the human has buy-in to everything that you're doing. And so they're more likely to approach it with a more critical mindset. Actually negatives and benefits towards the agent, but in the case of work assessment, humans, they're more likely to question the things that you're doing. If I tell a model to add a filter to a product list, it usually does not stop to ask whether the code base already has canonical server-side query builders, right? It's not looking at the greater granular details of the system. Later Anthropic and OpenAI models, they will pick up on this a little bit, but I find that they do it when you tell them to do it. Really, it's going to go through whatever it takes to implement the feature. It's going to do what it can. But if you tell it, specifically to evaluate our approach, or, give it some kind of leading idea that you want it to actually evaluate the bigger picture, I find that it actually does do that. But so kind of as we were discussing before, when it's a human, you don't need to be explicit here. Whereas the agent has to be told to do it. Whereas the human has to think about this stuff because it impacts their life on a deeper level. Models tend to enthusiastically integrate ideas. And this is absolutely true, right? I did a video recently talking about the kind of cost of ideas versus the cost of code. You really have to vet your own ideas. At the end of the day, they are machines, and, they could design these models in a way that does what this article is saying, right? Where it prevents you from, going off the deep end with any of your ideas. Problem is you get trade-offs with this. There's always trade-offs. And most people are not willing or would want a model that's super slow because it has to evaluate every single decision that you make before it approves it. It goes on to discuss alignment debt, which is a bit different from technical debt in that it's not really wrong, technically. The tests might pass, code looks good, right? Everything looks good on the surface. But if you look at, the product picture itself, the market may not have buy-in here. Now, this isn't really an AI's fault. Right, I think this was a case that we had pre-AI. People were being misguided and going in the wrong direction with what they were doing. And I would even argue that it really hasn't gotten worse because of AI. We do have more power at our fingertips for sure. But at the end of the day, this wand that you're given of the LLM is still in your control. I wouldn't think we need to concern ourselves with LLM developments here, right? If we were to develop the LLMs to care about alignment, the problem we run into is it's just going to conform all of our products to basically a plain freaking cardboard box product limited by the training data. I would say alignment debt is not a concern of the LLM. I think this is mainly on the user. He highlights that sycophantic agents really increase our need to be careful, right? The person closest to the model increasingly controls what gets built. And so this makes request framing, strategic clarity, and review quality more important than ever. Our expectations of the bar in terms of what was good. Pre-AI, I think our bar here was a little bit different. The expectations we have of something being worth shipping has gone up along with the ability to design these things. It may not look like it, right? We are still kind of in an era where a lot of bad shit is coming out, a lot of slop. And so I do agree it's important to, frame and strategic clarity and the importance of review. But I don't think this has gotten worse from AI. It then goes on to say that the bottleneck now is in the review process. Ideally, if you're going into the design in the right way, this wouldn't be the case, right? Really, your idea should go through many, many layers of validation before it reaches production. Maybe doing a POC of the idea, asking others about the idea, or looking around the market for how they're implementing this idea. There's so much vetting that should be going on before you actually begin the implementation. And so I don't believe upstream review has to be the bottleneck. I think really, if you're taking the time to vet your ideas, this wouldn't be an extra issue. He does go into, how the newer models are improving on this, but they're still not all the way there. And I 100% agree with that. Even models that we released have been released today, right? Opus 5 just came out. This is still a model that suffers from a little bit of positive steering, right? If there's one area you can be sycophantic on, I think it's fine if it's in the software realm, but if you're, suicidal or something, you definitely don't want it agreeing with your opinions there. AI responses affirm the user's stance or positions 49% more often than human responses. Obviously, these are trust me bro metrics. I don't know how exactly they're measuring these, but just from my usage of AI, I can tell you it is very much more on the positive side. And it quotes, "The problem with this position is that there is now ample evidence collected over the last few years that AI systems are unpredictable and difficult to control." Right, kind of how I was saying before about trade-offs. I think if the AI labs really wanted to, they could make an LLM that is just perfect in this regard. But the trade-offs that are being made to achieve that are so large that they don't want to do that. And so I'm of the opinion that, yes, and no doubt, AI is, feeling our egos and our dumb ideas. But at the end of the day, I think this is on us to avoid and prevent. I think everyone wants to throw tomatoes at OpenAI companies and say, oh, you're terrible for this, that, and the other. Right? You do have a brain at the end of the day. Mistakes will happen, and sometimes these are good things, right? You're gonna go down mistakeful paths with these LLMs even, and you'll learn. And ultimately, I think this was stuff that we faced even before AI. I think this was partially a product of the internet, right? You can Google something and find a forum somewhere that agrees with just about anything. Right, there is just so much potential to find something. So even pre-AI, we were Googling things like why iPhone is better than Android. When you Google something like this, you're gonna find forums that kind of go into this argument in a positive way most of the time. But you could literally flip this and say why Android is better than iPhone, and then you get a whole different set of results. So this does not change. It never changed. Still the same thing, right? We want to throw tomatoes at OpenAI for this stuff and Anthropic, but this is just how it's always been.